Sidelines with Rob Browne. Talk sporty to me.
All right, Rob Browne here with you on this Wednesday morning midweek show here, broadcasting all over. Dudley Dawson's going to be checking in with us, hogville.net in the first segment. A lot to talk about. Razorbacks have a big matchup down in Fort Worth this weekend. Excited. This is KJ Jefferson's third time to go against the Aggies. We'll see what he does. Last year, close loss. That one hurt. And it kind of started Arkansas on a slide last year, but that was one that they had, and I think they are coming into this game. Revenge doesn't win games, but this is one I think that the Razorbacks desperately want. Looking forward to hearing Dudley's thoughts on that. Will Gunter in the second segment checks in from Columbia. Gamecocks had a big win over the weekend against Mississippi State. A lot more football to be played, and our number 2 will be joined by Yancy Porter, Rebel Yell Hotline. He's going to check in with us. What's going on at Ole Miss? Are Ole Miss fans happy with what Lane Kiffin's doing? He cannot beat Nick Saban. Start breaking down the stats. That's what we're going to do with Yancy. They got a tough quarterback in Jackson Dart. They got a lot of things going for them. They got LSU coming to town, and I think that's a winnable game for them. It's going to be tough. It always is. But I think they hate LSU more than they hate Mississippi State, especially a lot of the older Ole Miss fans. And in the fourth segment, Johnny Ballpark Franks checks in with us from Nashville. We will be getting a lot out of him, the national picture. He's also an FSU alum. Talk about that win. They're undefeated, or as Sonny would say, undefeated, have not lost yet. 6 times a week show is on here 25 times a month. Remember that, okay? Sidelines.live. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/@sidelines_live. All right, Dudley Dawson. Man, 2 weeks in a row in the fourth quarter, winnable games for the Hogs. They are very close. And, watching that game against LSU, that's about as tough a way as there is when you lose on the last second of the game. But a lot of people thought, well, they were just going in for a public beheading to Baton Rouge. And I was like, that's not how this stuff works. It's always darkest before dawn. And they go down there, and had they converted those field goals were touchdowns, they win by 10 or 14. It's a crazy world we live in with college football, isn't it?
Absolutely. You had a situation where everybody believes they should have beaten BYU, and I think especially after watching BYU lose to Kansas the following week, that one hurts a little bit more. But nice effort down there. I'm not going to say great effort, because great effort would not have involved the double-digit penalties again, and I think they had that under control before half, but certainly not after intermission. And you are what your record says you are. They're 2-2. It's not going to change. The only thing you can do is move forward. As you said, Texas A&M has dominated them in this series down in Arlington in terms of wins and losses. And again, that's what matters. I do expect them to have a great effort this week. Rocket Sanders, from all intents and purposes, will be back. Certainly won't be 100%, but 90% of Rocket Sanders is better than most running backs in the country. And I think he'll give them an emotional lift to go along with, they got some confidence back in going and playing an 18-point favorite, to the wire, last Saturday.
Well, you're talking about, the comments are coming in already. You're going to have depth at running back when you bring back Rocket Sanders. And Green's good, but if you've got one running back, they're not going to carry in this world 35 or 40 carries. That makes a huge difference. I mean, Rocket Sanders is 6'2", 6'3", 243 pounds, runs a 4.5 40. You're talking a huge difference maker. But the penalties on the offensive line, I looked at a chart of offensive lines in the SEC, and it ranked them. Auburn's the worst with 16 penalties on the offensive line. Is it just me, or do you see this, Dudley? They're less targeting calls this year, but a hell of a lot more holding. They're throwing those flags up at a faster rate than I can remember.
Yeah, that's probably it. I mean, they get a lot of criticism, the officials, over the targeting, and they've tried to massage those rules a little bit to keep people into games, although Arkansas still got two of them in that first game, and Chris Paul was out. The linebacker was out for half, the following game. I do think that you could call holding on about every play if you wanted to, the letter of the law, if that's it. I do think that most of Arkansas's penalties have been valid. There's a few in there that are questionable, but as I said last week, it's like a baseball pitcher. If you throw balls all the time, you throw a strike, he's probably still going to call a ball. And when you get the reputation of being, an offensive line that holds, let's be honest, really it hadn't been the holding as much as the pre-snap penalties, the movement by LSU and false starts. I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of false starts they've gotten. And you just can't do that in a college football setting against a good football team. I think it's 25 penalties in 2 weeks now. That's just horrendous.
That's it's a lack of discipline is what it is.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
For guys to do it, because it's like speeding. You know what the speed is, but also we were talking with Ben Troop yesterday about holding. If you look at it, there's probably holding to some extent on every play, and they teach you how to do it. But it's like the officials get some directive and they're, hyper focused on the holding penalties. The defensive linemen, they can do whatever they want. Offensive linemen, it's different. And again, I'm seeing less targeting, and I think that's because they're trying to speed the game up. And the sacrificing less targeting to speed the game up, they're calling too many holding penalties. And
those certainly take a lot of time to mark off and do that as well. So it's not happening. I mean, the only thing that's happening more in college football to me is commercials. I mean, it may be the same amount, but it sure seems like there's less football and more commercials, which I know money runs all things, but still, as we talked about on the show, I was against all the baseball speed up rules before the season started, but once we got into it, I thought it was the right thing. I haven't clicked on that and been positive about everything involved with college football, officiating and rules and all that now. But Arkansas is not 2-2 because of the referees. Arkansas is 2-2 because they've been undisciplined in spots they shouldn't have been.
Yeah, and I'm with you. By the third or fourth game of the season, you are who you are, and your record is always what it is. People say, "Well, we'd have been 11-1 if this and that and that." Well, that's because you didn't get the job done. The other team just beat you. And I think fan bases that are always whining about the officials and all that, they're not helping. I mean, you can't do that. You've got to just say, football is a 60-minute game. You got to go out there and take care of business from the beginning, and don't let the referees determine the outcome. That's it. I like your take on it. Chris Saxon, what's up with Rocket Sanders? Saw he practiced full pads at full speed yesterday. Well, if you're an Arkansas fan, that's great news. For people playing Arkansas, that's a problem. Let's talk about the matchup with A&M. They beat Auburn last weekend. Not hard to do. When Auburn, 52 yards passing with an offense that's again like watching elephant races. It's pathetic. It's just not good. And if they don't get that fixed, they've got a path to beat Georgia. A lot of things have got to happen, but I don't think 90,000 people show up to games anywhere expecting to lose. But that's another story. I look at this A&M game. A&M's got a really good defensive line. Arkansas, their offensive line has got to cut the mistakes down. If they can do that, I mean, they can win this game because they've got a great quarterback, and he is he throws a great. Some of those deep balls he threw against LSU were, as your T-shirt says, legendary.
Yeah, and by the way, honoring Brooks Robinson, who was my first baseball hero. Yep. Someone I ended up naming my firstborn son after, and he appreciated. He didn't know about him early on, but he appreciated him as it gone along. But first of all, with Rocket, yes, he's been practicing the last couple of weeks, but not doing everything last week. He's done more this week. Rashad Dominion, who's, kind of played himself into the number 2 running back spot now, behind Rocket, made the mention yesterday. Oh, it's great. We're going to have him back. He's looking great. He's doing everything. And I'm sure the coaches are going to say, listen, dude, you don't have to share all that. We've been coach speaking for a long time around here, but it does appear that he's coming back. And, this was always, from what we were hearing, the goal was to get him back by the Texas A&M game. As you mentioned, Texas A&M has a great defensive line. That is a matchup that when the so-called experts do their matchups, they'll say, well, Texas A&M is going to have the advantage of defensive line. They should there. But you have a couple of extra offensive linemen when your quarterback's 252 or 245 or whatever it is, your running back's 243. That's going to help you out a lot. And I think that, having him back in there will help. I think that, getting some of that confidence last week can help. But again, it's going to boil down to penalties and turnovers, as most football games do. I thought Auburn and Texas A&M, you could call it a defensive game last week. I thought it was an offensive piddle fight in the first half. The most exciting play was Jimbo Fisher stepping out on the field. And whether
what was that, Dudley? I didn't mean to interrupt. What the hell was that?
He talked at his press conference about how he thought it was fumble and the play was dead. Usually when the play's dead, they blow a whistle, but I guess he was, he couldn't hear it. But he made clear he was wrong. But I seriously for a minute there thought he was going to get trucked, and that would have been interesting. There was no penalty, no throw down a game. Just anyway, it was like play it on, very intriguing.
Well, I mean, it was just funny because Eugene Asante he turned his back and went and let him go right by him. He realized oh my God, because there was a game, Alabama and A&M years ago, where was it Tommy Childress ran off the Alabama sidelines and tackled the A&M guy, and he goes, "Well,
Dickie Nagel, wasn't it? Dickie Nagel."
Okay, yeah. He said, "I just got too much Bama in me," or something like that. It was just that was one of the funniest things. Of course, none of us were around when that happened, but it did. But this matchup, Connor Wigman goes out at halftime with a high ankle sprain, I believe, and then they bring in Max Johnson, whose dad Brad played 17 years in the NFL after a hell of a career at Florida State. They were better with him in their quarterback. Kind of why? Dudley, you're smart.
Well, it's interesting. I think Connor Wegman was a little obviously banged up even before he had the ankle injury. He's played well for them. And Bobby Petrino, if I can say one thing about him, he knows his quarterbacks. He knows how to coach his quarterbacks. And Connor Wegman earned the honor, being the starting quarterback. I think if he's healthy, and everything would appear that he would be able to play this week. And Max Johnson would remain the backup. Arkansas is very familiar with Max Johnson, having seen him twice at LSU, and also having seen him last year in the ball game at Arlington when Haynes King was hurt, and he came in and he had a pedestrian game, but he didn't make mistakes, and that's the big thing in these ball games a lot. Don't make mistakes, don't give the other team. He, as you said, he did play well the other night. They were able to get some points up in the second half. And, they're very comfortable with him being the quarterback. And that's the good thing. A lot of times people say you have two quarterbacks. And I think they have two quality quarterbacks. They don't have one great quarterback, but they have two quarterbacks they can win with.
Well, I'm thinking you want to have one quarterback, but that's Bobby Petrino effect. Could you see when you've watched A&M play, what you know about Bobby Petrino and characteristics of his offenses? Because I can already see it in the competence of the quarterbacks, the way the receivers run their routes. The offense it's not a well-oiled machine yet because the defense is keeping them in games, but you can definitely tell they're better coached, a lot better with him. That's my take.
What I would say is that, you'll never get me to criticize Bobby Petrino as on the field, his coaching. I mean, he's always been, great at that. He's an offensive mind that, a lot of people respect, and I do as well, in terms of what he does on the field. And I would say that he hadn't been able to institute everything he wants yet because, obviously he doesn't have the players, the entire 11 on offense that he wants to have, but he does have some really good parts and he's making do with what he has. I do think once he gets everything in there, he may be at a different school by then. I think this is a way station on his way back to a head coaching job. But it's interesting. This Arkansas season, these last 2 weeks, has gone so weird that Bobby Petrino playing Arkansas is not the biggest story this week.
Well, I mean, Bobby Petrino he's always going to be a big story. But A&M, they got 10 5-stars on that roster. They got a lot of talent. And maybe Bobby Petrino has come in there and got those guys playing, together. But offensively, Arkansas, Dan Enos going up against him. I think this is going to be one of those games like Isaac Asimov in Opp, Alabama. Texas A&M, I love these names. Texas A&M, Arkansas will go down to the last drive. KJ will get her done. I don't know KJ Jefferson. You get to talk to him. You're around him. He grew up 10 miles away from Vaught-Hemingway Stadium in Sardis, Mississippi. But, man, he looks like, to me, would be a great teammate. He keeps his cool. He makes everybody around him want to work harder. And he's really proud to be an Arkansas Razorback. No matter what happens, he's got his NIL. And that is, he grinded it out. He stayed through. He gets this win Saturday in Dallas. I think the whole season turns for Arkansas. But if they don't get the win, what happens, in your opinion?
Well, I think they'll be 2-5 then, and it'll be massive burning down the bridges up here in terms of fans. Now, back to KJ. He's a great leader, a great teammate. I have the opportunity to talk to a lot of these kids in unofficial settings, just as a dude or whatever, instead of a writer and on the record. And they just love it. And, it's amazing the amount of respect that his teammates have for him, his coaches have for him. There's a certain segment of the population or fan base that when Arkansas loses the game, no matter if a dude completed his first 13 passes or, if he made incredible plays, all that, it's still his fault. That's just how the quarterback position works at most schools. But I think I think there are a lot of people around here who were very surprised that he came back after the change in offensive coordinators, after, things didn't go great, there toward the end of the season, but he did. And he wanted to finish his career here. That's what's going to happen. And let me be very honest about something. There were plenty of people reaching out, wanting him to come be their quarterback. People in the SEC, people at other schools, and he held on with Arkansas. And there's a lot to be said for that. Yeah, I do think he's excited about this ball game. He certainly was excited about LSU's game. And I'll tell you what, I think the biggest difference in this offense going down the line is going to be the fact that Luke Haas is now a weapon. And Luke Haas has his confidence as the new tight end, the freshman tight end who had some big plays the other day. He is a matchup problem. He was a matchup problem for the little guys in high school. He's a matchup problem for the bigger guys in college. We saw him have 6 catches for 116 yards last week. He showed the feel of doing the things that you do. We can give KJ a lot of credit for getting the pass to him for the touchdown, but he made the move to move on down the field and get himself open for KJ. And I think that showed a lot of, football IQ.
Well, KJ's 6'3", 245. And we talked so much about how last year at the Mississippi State game in Starkville, he wasn't, available because he was banged up. The LSU game, 13-10. Did it sleet or freezing rain up in Fayetteville that day?
No, it just, that
was cold,
game.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, well, that was the game when Malik Hornsby was, played quarterback most of the way there. Yeah.
And then the Liberty game. And so then this year, I'm talking about it, just me, that, if he would run less and not get banged up and he's, there for every game, that's a big help. But then we hear that Arkansas's got a lot of designed running plays. Well, you should. He's 6'3", 245, and he's bigger than a lot of the linebackers he goes up against. I mean, Harold Perkins Jr. out of Houston. For all we hear about him, is he an edge rusher, a middle linebacker? I think he's an edge rusher, but he's 6'1", 214 pounds. You think KJ coming at him? Golly, KJ Jefferson, like every quarterback, gets a lot of criticism, but damn, I think he's got one of the best arms, passing, beautiful. And he doesn't throw. How many interceptions has he thrown in the last 2 seasons? 6.
I think it's 7 total.
Okay.
And
Okay.
one of and at least 2 of them, the receivers have talked about how they weren't in the right place and costing interceptions. He usually throws the ball where it's supposed to be. Now he has, and I don't think it's any secret, there have been a lot of short throws that he hadn't thrown as well this year. There has been some issue, I think, with that shoulder, and he got banged up again at the end of the LSU game. But he just comes back and fights through it. I'm a big fan of what he has done here, what he continues to do here. I don't think he's perfect. There's not very many quarterbacks who are perfect, and they get the blame when something goes wrong. But I mean, let's just talk about this. If he's not in that game last week, LSU just floors Arkansas.
Yeah. Ted Underhill in Palm Springs, California. Who ordered 2 bottles of Dom Perignon for Jimbo? I like that. Remember that in Fletch, Ted Underhill? I mean, where do these people come from? These things come in here. Jimbo Fisher. And, no matter what happens, if he's fired with cause, if they go 8-5 this year and they fire him with cause, he's walking away, Dudley, with more than $70 million. I mean, I like him. I don't dislike Jimbo. I will always be grateful for the 6 years Terry Bowden, Jimbo Fisher, and them saved Auburn during probation and all from going into the abyss of hell, of irrelevance. And Jimbo's got a lot of friends in Auburn. A lot of people, they don't like him. I think they look at the money he makes, and then they look at the lack of wins at A&M. He had a good thing going at Florida State.
Mm-hmm.
This is the 6th year for him there. This is year 4 for Sam Pittman. Who do you think long-term? Both schools have a lot of money. I mean, we talk about Arkansas. It's not just the Waltons. I mean, it's Warren Stevens in Little Rock. I know a lot of them, and you know a lot of them. Is Arkansas committed to doing everything they need to do to win? Because I think Sam Pittman's a hell of a program builder. I don't know him, met him a couple of times, hell of a coach. But if there's one thing he's got going for him, Dudley, he said at the SEC media days that he likes him an old ham's beard, and that endears him to my heart.
Well, I think we're about to find out if this season goes off the rails, and it certainly has the possibility because of the schedule they have. Then we're going to find out just how committed Arkansas is to Sam Pittman, just how committed Sam Pittman is to Arkansas. Now, we believe that latter to be, the deal. But, people get upset around here, and Hunter Yurachek, we'll have to make a decision if things go wrong. It's the 4th year. There's a big drum beat from the fans. If they turn this around, they'll love the dude as they had. This whole shutting down his Twitter has riled up some folks on both sides, positive and negative and all that. But as far as Jimbo Fisher, the deal is Sam got some money, not as much as Jimbo, and they're certainly not going to have as much to walk away. But I get the whole thing with Texas A&M fans being upset because they were sold that he would come in, he would have the same success at Florida State, and that's why we're going to give him all this money. And that's not been the case. And also, he's had great recruiting classes, but as I've said this week, they had a lot of people that came in there, I believe, got their NIL money and transferred out. And they lost a bunch of people in the transfer portal, brought a bunch of it in as well.
Yeah,
I think he's on the hot seat, and I think the Hail Mary, the true Hail Mary was bringing in Coach Petrino. That's not you don't do that unless you're in a situation where you absolutely have to win. You're on the hot seat. Those are 2 gigantic I mean, gigantic personalities backing up, going up against each other, even though they're on the same team.
Yeah.
And they've said all the right things, but man, come on now.
Yeah. I mean, Bobby Petrino, look, it was funny to listen to. I listened to the Auburn football broadcast on the app while I'm watching a game wherever I am. And if I'm at the game, I have the network always. Well, Jason Campbell was quarterback at Auburn in 2002, the 1 year Petrino was there. And that really, really helped Jason a lot. It was just funny to listen to him talking about Petrino because you pretty much know what a coach is. Bobby's father coached for 29 years at University of Montana, NAIA, in the Hall of Fame. And I asked Tommy Tuberville this one time, I said, in 2002, you replaced John Lovett, your defensive coordinator, with Gene Chizik from UCF. You also replaced Noel Mazzoni, your offensive coordinator, with Bobby Petrino. And I said, Coach, do you just have a list in your back pocket of the top 5 assistant coaches at every position in the country with their cell phones? He goes, yes. I mean, it just wasn't any debate. He goes, yeah. I go, where did you learn to do that? He said, Jimmy Johnson, Larry Lacewell. By the way,
who learned it from Frank Broyles.
Yeah, and who learned it from Frank Broyles. And, Audrey's ex-husband lives in Jonesboro, and Ray was telling us one time, he said, I kept seeing this big black Suburban pull up across the street in our cove there, across the street. And I was like, God, that's Jerry Jones and the cadre. Well, Larry Lacewell lived across the street from Ray, and he's a friend of mine's godfather. And I don't know if you knew Larry Lacewell, but I think he's one of the smartest football minds ever. And he always would say, I'm the second winningest coach ever to come out of Fordyce, Arkansas. That other guy, Paul W. Bryant. But I'm telling you, I love Arkansas. I spend a lot of time over here. My grandparents are from Helena. God, there's a football tree over here. And Dudley, you know what I'm talking about. And man, there hadn't been a guy that's an outsider per se almost I've ever seen like Sam Pittman. So I'm just saying I hope he succeeds because he's just I brought this discussion up kind of off the air the other day. Fans of different schools. And, sometimes people want you to keep a coach if he's an imbecile, but everybody's like, that guy is so cool. Who wouldn't want to play for him? And I know Chris Saxon's nephew, Patrick, loves him. I don't think he liked getting his ass chewed out the other day after a penalty, but that's part of it. But, Larry Lacewell is, he passed away in the last year, but that Arkansas, that Frank Broyles coaching tree, it's worthy of a book. Have you ever thought about writing a book about it?
Yeah. And, as soon as the Social Security kicks in, I'll probably get back on that. I think I've got some books and some podcasts left in me. I don't know how many years of covering the beat daily, but I've got a lot left in the tank. I think, as far as Coach Pittman, I've said on here so many times, he's a good dude. Obviously, he's a great football man. We didn't know how the head coaching would work out because he hadn't done it. I think he has done a good job of bringing in some assistants, Barry Odom and others who have been in that position. He's learned a lot from Kirby Smart and others. It'll play itself out regardless of my opinion, regardless of the fans. He'll win and he'll be beloved here, or he'll lose and they'll have somebody else to gripe about. I mean, that's the way it works. But I don't root for anybody to fail. I think that's weird if you do. Even the people I don't like, I don't root for them to fail. I just don't think about it. But let's be honest. College football is a big business, especially now that the money is. Excuse me. Especially now that the money, and that wasn't a sarcastic cough. That was a real cough. Especially now that the money is on the table instead of under it. And all that. And you either win and you get to continue to coach, or you lose and you don't. I mean, it's pretty simple. No matter whether you're a great guy or whether you're the biggest jerk ever. Well.
I mean, and I think you're right, is that we look at coaches, in my opinion, with their salaries nowadays. And I said this years ago about professional athletes. Too often they're known more for the size of their contract than they are game-saving tackles or extra effort or just being great teammates. And I think that's that's to me something that we need to think about. Dudley, I hope you can stay on with us. We're going to have Will Gunter from ESPN 107.5 The Game over in Columbia, South Carolina. Also got a statewide show in Myrtle Beach and Florence and around the great Palmetto State. But I'll tell you something. One of my viewers on the show sent me a text morning, said every time you expressed gratitude or compassion for any aspect of yourself or someone else, you breathe life in. And I think I look for the good in people. I don't ever pull for people to fail. That's not my style. But another thing, Haas has a high football IQ.
Absolutely.
I think, yeah, he's a good one. All right. As they say in the country, my grandmother from Hohenwald, Tennessee used to say, he's a good egg. I'm like, is he a good egg? But I now know what that means. All right. We'll take a quick break. We're going to be right back with Will Gunter and Dudley Dawson after this. This is Wednesday's midweek edition of Sidelines.
Red River Ford and Toyota, located in Wynne, Arkansas. If you're in the market for a new or used car, truck, or SUV, call, go online, or drop by and see them. Located 45 minutes from Memphis, go off the 4-city exit on I-40 and go north about 15 minutes on Highway 1. Easy to work with and still believe in customer service. If you live out of town, they will deliver your vehicle to you. RedRiverFordToyota.com. Just see what they can do.
Strengthen your seed zone this spring with quality tillage equipment from House Industries. Located in Cherry Valley, Arkansas, House Industries specializes in manufacturing superior equipment that will minimize your downtime and keep you working in the field. To ensure the highest quality control, all design, fabrication, and testing takes place in a 99,000 square foot manufacturing facility located right here in the heart of the Delta. Locate your nearest House equipment dealer online at houseindustriesinc.com.
House Industries, breaking ground.
Sidelines with Rob Browne. Talk sporty to me.
Unbelievably, every 2 minutes in our communities, a child is either bought or sold for sex. I am Ari Dickey, board member for the Nashville Anti-Human Trafficking Coalition. Join me and millions of others in our fight against human trafficking and for its victims by helping to educate the most vulnerable among us, our middle and high school students. Go to nhtcoalition.org, become a partner, and help keep our families safe, because none of God's children are for sale.
All right, Rob Browne back here. Let's bring Will Gunter in with Dudley Dawson. Dudley, hogville.net, folks. Dudley, tell them real quick before we go with Will how they can follow you and all your great work. And I don't want to miss that. And then we're going to get into a lively discussion about the Fighting Beamers.
Hogville.net is the website I work for. Covers all aspects of Arkansas. I concentrate a lot on baseball and softball, but have my hand in all the other sports. And then Fearless Friday, as I say all the time, is the high school site that's associated with it. And, that's where I get my love for all things football and baseball and basketball. I like the aspect of the non-business of sports as well.
Yeah. All right. Will Gunter, that was a big win the other night. 37-30 over Mississippi State. And, man, the crowds there in Columbia are awesome. It's a passionate fan base, like these SEC fan bases are. But, man, I like this one from Stacy in Chattanooga. The cocks are rolling when the rattler is shaking. I like that. I've got a small dog of my wife's that has a small tail that shakes like a rattler. And if she's shaking it, she will bite. I'm the only one she bites. But anyway, Spencer Rattler looks like he's just decided to block out all the noise and just be the best quarterback the quarterback that everybody said he was coming out of high school as the number 1 or 2 player in the country. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, he looks obviously is playing at an extremely high level, and probably if was playing for a more high profile team would be in the Heisman discussion more prominently. But 2-2 South Carolina, and not maybe going to put him in that discussion. But I think part of it, what has happened that has never happened. I don't know if anybody considers Lincoln Riley to be a quarterback guru when it comes to coaching. He's had some great quarterbacks, obviously, but they were a lot of elite guys, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts. But I think you're seeing Dow Loggins, who wasn't the best offensive coordinator in the NFL, but was widely revered as a very good quarterbacks coach, a guy who actually worked on small mechanics, on footwork, on throwing motion, having an impact on Spencer in his 10 months on campus now as the offensive coordinator, Dow Loggins. So I think that's an interesting way. I think there's two parts to it. One, I think he's comfortable. He's not staring at Caleb Williams over his shoulder. And again, too, having an actual quarterback coach that can work on just small fundamentals, a guy who's been in the NFL and tutored a lot of really good NFL quarterbacks that can bring that and kind of prepare him for the next level.
I think that's a good point. I think Dal, by the way, who was born in Newport, Arkansas, as I was. It's always good to have football people from Newport, Arkansas, I think. But Dal's had a lot of experience, and as you said, I think he's always done really well with quarterbacks, and even when he was coaching tight ends here, he was helping with some suggestions and stuff. And I think he's just a really good dude, and that I think that's been a big hire for him. I know that there were a lot of people disappointed here when he left here to go to South Carolina, but it was a great opportunity for him.
Yeah, he stepped in and I think done well. And again, I as good as the offense has been, and it's been much improved, obviously, and I think that's why they maybe have a chance in every game moving forward. The fact that you hired a quarterback coach, a guy who knows the ins and outs, again, worked in the NFL. I think that's important for not just for Spencer Rattler, but there's a young man behind him that they're very, very excited about, Lenore Sellers, who has got the potential to be a really good one down the line. That's big for Shane Beamer, having somebody at the position. Because I tell you, I think it gets lost in the SEC because of recruiting. You can recruit 5 and 4 stars all you want, but if you don't have guys to coach them up and to get them to where they need to be, it usually doesn't equal the wins that you want to have.
The South Carolina team, this is year 3 for Frank Beamer.
Shane Beamer.
Shane Beamer. I know, because Frank, I've got all that Virginia Tech. A brother-in-law played for him. 2 nieces and a nephew graduated from there, and a sister living in Roanoke, and all of them still. But no, I saw Frank Beamer on the sidelines the other day. I love that guy because I was in Virginia when I wasn't at the press conference. I was in Roanoke watching it live when they introduced him as the coach back then. He's just one of those guys that, man, he's a football coach like Dudley, and we all know that you just love. He's a man's man. He's an alpha male. Frank Beamer is as passionate and hyper. I mean, I know I'm hyper, but you can't help but like the guy. And what is he like to cover win or lose? He's a family first guy, but he seems like he loves being at South Carolina. He wanted to be back there.
Shane Beamer. Yeah, he was born in Charleston, and so he kind of designates this, even though obviously he grew up in Blacksburg and a lot of history there, a lot of family ties. This is more home to him. He's labeled that. Now, whether he said that, because he's the coach of South Carolina or because he legitimately feels it, that's coaches can say we're having a week where coaches are saying a lot of things publicly, good and bad. But the truth is that he saw this job, and I think he saw the other part is he saw the success that Steve Spurrier had at South Carolina, and Steve Spurrier didn't only just show the South Carolina fan base. But he also showed the SEC and maybe the nation you can win at South Carolina. It's not a black hole, and so I think Shane sees that. And to be quite honest, the expectations here are not that of the majority of big name schools. If you can win 9 games for 3 or 4 consecutive years, just 9 games, and go 2-2 against Clemson, we'll have a boom of babies named Shane, and we'll have streets named Beamer Way, and that's the way it is. And then you raise that expectation where, okay, 9 isn't good enough. You got to win 10. But the truth is you can kind of live on that. And again, it's a good place to live in terms of Charleston being an hour and a half away. If you want to go to the mountains and go to Asheville, which has got a cool little scene, you're about 2 hours away. It's a really good place to live. I can't speak. I've never been to Blacksburg. I've heard stories about it from my father when South Carolina played Virginia Tech back in the 80s, and they loved that road trip. So I've heard nothing but great things about Blacksburg. But Shane has got a lot going on here with what I think he's learned from his father, what he's learned from Philip Fulmer. He was a graduate assistant in Tennessee. What he's learned from Kirby Smart being there, what he's learned from Lincoln Riley. I mean, you look at Shane's pedigree, and if you talk about somebody who creates a recipe of a football coach and takes this little part and that little part and this little part, Shane's kind of that recipe of what you need to be a great football coach because of all the people he's learned from.
Yeah. And Dudley, you interview a lot of coaches. You've seen a lot of coaches. That first 2 or 3 years, that's when your footprint of what you're going to be going forward pretty much is laid, isn't it?
Yeah, I love Shane's passion. In fact, it was 2 years ago, I think, that I asked him a question, and he kind of genuflected and did all this, and that kind of went viral. But he called me, got my number from the Arkansas Sports Information, called me, and really talked about what he was. Not only that he was sorry it happened and all that, which he didn't have to do, but that how he was so passionate. He was so excited. He wanted to get the South Carolina thing rolling again. And I think that, these past couple of weeks have shown that, they've got a really good chance. And if you can, it's kind of like the same thing with Pittman here. If you can survive some early games and get going, then you're going to be okay. If you don't, then, there's a lot to deal with. But I love his passion, and I think he's a really, really good football coach.
And Will, getting a lot of questions right now. You saw that one from Jethro Tull in Smyrna, Georgia. Beamer Ball needs a running back or depth at the running back position. With where the wide receiver is going, Art Kehoe, legendary offensive line coach at Miami for a long time, a friend of mine who coached 38 years, mainly, Division II, Division III in high school, he would go to all these clinics on the offensive line. Art Kehoe, 30 years ago, said, going forward, the prima donna in football, college, and then the pros is going to be the wide receiver. Are we seeing more guys opt to go to the wide receiver position versus running back? Because I don't see any Herschel Walkers or Bo Jacksons or Marcus Dupree's or Earl Campbell's or Billy Sims on the horizon. I don't see them out there. The best two in the league, Quinshon Judkins at Ole Miss, they went from a zone blocking scheme to man, and they're not running the ball hardly at all this year. And then Rocket Sanders has been hurt, and he'll be back hopefully Saturday. But what do you think about that question? I think it's a good one.
I think you're right and you're wrong at the same time. I think that the what you're saying is right. That there was an article on this. There was an article on this recently, but it's running backs are moving to linebacker. Those guys that you just mentioned are bigger physical guys, right?
Yeah.
And they're moving to the linebacker position or going and playing kind of a bigger safety, a hybrid safety, 6'2", 215, 220. Now you got the smaller guys who want to be the slot receivers. There's a guy, Jonathan Paylor, that is a 4-star wide. He's a wide receiver. If his film looks better as a running back, in my opinion, South Carolina wanted him badly to be a wide receiver. But he went to North Carolina State, or is committed to North Carolina State. But that's a guy that I think in the past would have been put at wide receiver. There's another young guy, Jamias Williams, who was actually recruited. He was at Georgia State, has left. He was one of the Will Muschamp's first big recruits, and he was about 5'8", 185, and was dynamic. Urban Meyer came down and recruited him out of Grayson, Georgia, out of Grayson High School. And Urban Meyer wanted him to be a running back, and the young man wanted to be a defensive back because of exactly what you said. So there is that. But I think you see more kids. South Carolina and Alabama are mixed up in a recruiting battle right now for a 6'2", 220-pound running back named Daniel Hill. And he was on campus at Alabama last weekend, I believe. And so anyway, that's one of the rare occurrences where you've got a guy, because he's a running back linebacker, and that's a rare occurrence where you've got a guy that size, 6'2", 220, that wants to play the running back position as opposed to linebacker. Because just looking ahead, a lot of those guys don't get to if you're good enough, they don't get to the second NFL contract. They bring them in, use them up those 5 years, and then let's bring another guy in. I mean, those guys it's like walking down the street and finding pennies on the road. You can just pick them up left and right. And I think that's part of it is you look at your long-term potential in the NFL. If you're a running back, you better be so dynamic like a Derrick Henry or something. I think even Derrick Henry's stats are starting to drop this year because of the beating he's taken.
Yeah.
You don't get to that second contract. You can't. It's hard. I think the first weekend of the NFL, I was watching, I think it was Fox, and they did that little parody and they called it running back contract neglect. How can Daniel Jones sign a $160 million contract and Saquon Barkley is fighting for his life for $10 million? So, yeah, that's kind of funny what it is nowadays.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to point out that he was bringing up there. I mean, the story this summer about the running backs thinking about unionizing and all this kind of stuff, so they could get more money. Those kids want to get to the NFL. They listen to what they're saying. And as he said, that second contract is a big one. Being the Dallas Cowboy fan that I am, loved what Zeke did for us along the way. But, in his last 50 carries, he combined for 100 yards. I mean, he was done. And I think these kids all want to play in the NFL, and they hear the stories about how running backs are just throwaways these days in the NFL. So, if you've got the opportunity to be a wide receiver in an offense that gets the ball, if you get the ball a lot, I think there's going to be a lot toward that, kind of like the 7-on-7, kind of hurt offensive lineman recruiting.
Yeah, the article I read, I can't remember where it was, said more about linebacker, because a lot of these kids, I mean, obviously, if you're 5'10", 180, if 5'10", 180, 190, that's still tough to play running back in the SEC. You're going to get broken half.
Well, you go back to when Derrick Henry was in high school. He's from a town called Yulee, Florida, right outside of Jacksonville.
That story.
But over 12,000 yards rushing, though. Think about that.
Yeah, I went down South Carolina. Was recruiting a player when I was working for ESPN. A kid who came to South Carolina named Kelvin Rainey, and I learned where Yulee High School was. And I get off the exit and go out into the country and whatnot. And the coach comes over and introduces me to this tight end linebacker, Kelvin Rainey. And he goes, "Hold on, we got a ninth grader. I think is going to be really good. Let me bring this ninth grader to you." And he brings this grown ass man over to meet me, and I'm not a big guy. I'm 5'7". He brings this grown man over, and I thought it was the kid's father, and he breaks my hand, and he goes, "We don't know if he's going to be a linebacker or a running back, but his name is Derrick Henry, and we think he's going to be pretty good." And that was my introduction to Derrick Henry, and it is a ninth grader again. He looks the same today as he did as a ninth grader. He hadn't changed at all.
No, and he's just an incredible. He takes incredible care of himself. Both of y'all know this. Whenever you watch a behind the scenes documentary or any piece that's well done, what these running backs and what these professional athletes go through just to survive. I mean, as Ben Troop says, the SEC is the best league in America, and it's tough. It's a lot of contact. You get the hell beat out of you. He said the NFL is a collision league. It's like getting hit by cars and trucks throughout the game. And a lot of guys that we have on this show that when we talk to them, how long was your NFL career? 5 years. And they walk away on their terms. But there's very few guys like a Takeo Spikes, 15 years. Carlos Dansby out of Woodlawn in Birmingham, 16 or 17. Andrew Whitworth from LSU. I don't know who the longest tenured Razorback is, or Gamecock.
Well, they just had we talked about it on our show about a Razorback because my co-host Preston Thorne was a defensive lineman, and he went against Jason Peters. And Jason Peters just signed another contract, I believe, with the Seahawks. Another contract. Peters is 41. He's our age. So yeah, it's Jason Peters has got to be up there, right?
That's 19, Dudley. 19 years. You're muted, Dudley.
He was a tight end here too. He was in the offensive line. Didn't move to offensive line until he got to the NFL. But he's just kept signing those contracts. He's not to where he can play every play, obviously, as we saw it in Dallas last year. But he could still come in an NFL and get you some playing time and help you win some football games. Yeah, but he just wants to keep playing too. It's just in his nature.
the most badass Arkansas football player, pound for pound, I think I've ever seen, might be Steve Atwater. Would you agree?
Agree. I think he had a long career as well, and was rewarded with the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. And Will, when you look at South Carolina, what do you got? 5.2 million people in that state.
Yeah, give or take. I don't know.
Okay, but that's about the same as.
It's not your day. It's not your day to have the attendance.
Yes, no, you're not. No. I am Floyd R. Turbo with the Census Bureau. Here we go. No, but I think it's about a little over 5 million. Same population as Alabama. Same population as Louisiana. There's a lot of industry in South Carolina, shipping industry and all that. And here's something here from Jason Peters. And like seeing this, Jason Peters has been hurt. He is an emergency temp worker. You know what? 18, 19 years. This guy is money. I mean, and I bet you he's saving that money. And if he's got a guy like me as his financial advisor, whose mentor is Milburn Drysdale, from the Beverly Hillbillies, sock it away, act like you don't have it. But that might be the longest tenured NFL player since George Blanda, who made it to almost 50. I mean, and of course, Tom Brady. What did he do?
I was about to say, that dude.
Well, Aaron Rodgers was testing that theory. We'll see if he hangs around.
Do y'all think Aaron Rodgers comes back?
The best commercial out right now is uses Slim Shady's song "Guess Who's Back," and it's all that's just fantastic.
That is awesome. I mean, Emmitt Smith. Can anybody name where all these guys are from?
Yeah, well, you got Emmett's from Florida. Jerry's from Mississippi. Was it Mississippi Valley State? Randy's from Marshall. And who is the quarterback? Is the quarterback
Dan Marino?
Dan Marino. Oh yeah, Pittsburgh.
Yeah, he's from Pittsburgh. Yeah. I love hearing Jackie Sherrill talk about. He calls him Danny Marino. He calls him Danny. Oh, Danny boy, But he said when he left to go to A&M, and he said this on the show, so I would never violate anything said in private or all. But he said this on the show, telling the story. It was so cool. He said that opportunity to go to A&M, and that was the annuity and the big contract. Now back in '82, he had to get the okay from Danny, and because he'd recruited him, there in Pittsburgh. But those guys are from such a great era of football.
Oh, yeah.
But Dudley and I can remember this. You're a lot younger, Will, but you used to go to this gas station called DX. And remember this? You go there and you got this big book. And every time you got gas, you got trading stamps. Mm-hmm. And back then, the rosters, you had 47 players on there. Every time you got stamps, you would fill in the player when you got them. And so I used to make my parents, get gas every 3 or 4 hours. I wanted to film. And the one that was the hardest to get were the kickers. Garo Upremium at Miami, and one of the great names in the history of great names, Kansas City Chiefs field goal kicker, Jan Stenerud. Yes, and he wasn't from South Alabama. I think he was from over across the pond. But
I tell you, one of the things I really like too is, I'm 60 now, and I gave in to the readers not too long, a little while ago. But I love that commercial where Dan Marino, is looking down, has to look down on his wrist with his readers to see the play.
Emmitt Smith is asleep on the sidelines. Yeah. That is awesome. Well, looking here, I love this discussion. I love transitioning the guests to cover Arkansas, South Carolina, Alabama, whatever, because it's so much fun in this league. And I look at South Carolina. Look at the schedule. I'm sitting here looking right now, this weekend's game against, Tennessee in Knoxville. Not a lot of people talking about it, but this is a big game. How do you attack Tennessee and Joe Milton? And what do you think is going to happen? Joe Milton can throw the ball farther than any quarterback I can remember, but it didn't matter at Florida, did it?
Yeah, I don't have my numbers as I moved into a different studio. I don't have the numbers I use for the show, but I want to say it's 18% completion percentage if you get him off of his spot. and you make him move, he's a mobile quarterback. Obviously showed that against Texas San Antonio last week with that 75-yard run. So he can run, but throwing on the run is not what Joe Milton does particularly well. And again, I think it's either 21 or 18% as I look for my notes, and I don't have them sitting here, but it's a low percentage. So you've got to make him move. You can't let him, if you let Joe Milton stand back there and survey the field and you don't pressure him, he'll pick you apart. And, and he can throw that 80-yard bomb, and maybe there's a guy there, or maybe he hits a fan in the head, one of the two. But that's exactly what he does. And so it starts that way. South Carolina's defensive line is playing better. There's an interesting thing we're watching with the defensive line here. South Carolina had a defensive line coach change in May. Jimmy Lindsey left South Carolina, went to LSU, and unfortunately has now had some health issues and stepped away from football, so he didn't even make it to football season. But South Carolina brought back Travian Robertson, who was a big part of those Spurrier years. And Travian Robertson has really made a name for himself. He was at Georgia State, then worked his way to Tulane last year and was a big part of that Tulane defensive line that kind of got them to the Cotton Bowl and helped defeat Southern Cal. But Travian Robertson didn't come in the spring to be able to implement his techniques and maybe the things he wants to do that's a little bit different, right? You get those 14 spring practices and that spring game to the 15th spring game. And so he's had to start implementing what he wants to do on the fly starting in August, where you only get limited time to really do fundamentals, and then you start game planning. Well, back-to-back weeks. This is what we're watching. Back-to-back weeks against Georgia. You had a younger player named TJ Sanders who had a great week and was named co-defensive lineman of the week. And then this past week against Mississippi State, you had Alex Boogie Huntley win defensive lineman of the week. South Carolina's had defensive lineman of the week in back-to-back weeks. So is that interior starting to step up, or the edge guys starting to come around? Just something we're kind of keeping an eye on there, because now his coaching looks like maybe it's taking effect. All these things that made him kind of an up-and-comer, maybe it's taken a little bit longer. Maybe it's taken 8 weeks to start to sink in with these guys. But that's back-to-back weeks for South Carolina to have defensive lineman of the week.
Well, you talked about this matchup. Joe Milton, he's not Hendon Hooker. Hendon Hooker out of Greensboro, North Carolina, went to Virginia Tech, thought Justin Fuente would be a miracle worker with him, transfers to Tennessee. The stat that got me after the first couple of games, guys, was he was averaging per completion about 50% less in his first couple of games than Hooker last year. Year over year comps, and it's what you look at like on earnings. And it showed up in the Florida game. Dudley, you're looking at this game from 35,000 feet. What do you think happens, Carolina going up to Neyland Stadium? Last year, I don't think anybody, it was kind of like a blizzard comes in out of nowhere when it was expected to be, 75 degrees and sunny, 63-38. South Carolina scored on a touchdown on every possession, except one time when they ran out of time at the end of the first half and had to take a, walk to the locker room.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people on that Tennessee team who remember that game, and any thoughts that they wouldn't be up for this game definitely would. I agree. It's a great point. I always hear these announcers say, well, he throws better on the run. Well, nobody throws better on the run. Your wide receiver might be open and might be easier to get it to him, but nobody throws better on the run because you're worried about the defensive lineman catching you, and all that. If he's allowed to stay in the pocket, Tennessee will have a field day. If he's not, then I think South Carolina has a chance. I mean, you always, in my mind, and unless the two schools are vastly different, you take the SEC home team. Especially if the quarterbacks, are similar. Now, I do think Spencer Rattler's certainly playing much better than Joe Milton. But that being at home at Tennessee is quite a deal, and the revenge factor. While I only think that can only play for so long, I do think there won't be any let-ups or anything. South Carolina took them to the woodshed last year, and I'm sure that the coaching staff and all those people remember that. And it'll be one of the many games I'll be watching on Saturday for sure.
Yeah, and SEC Network. That one. That's going to be that's a super competitive game. I'm not looking at the line on it. What are the boys in the Land of Tall Buildings saying?
It's 12.5. 12.5 is what it is right now. Look, this game kind of comes down to two different things, and that is South Carolina improving upon their run game. Last week, they had a transfer, Mario Anderson, who stepped up and ran for 88 yards. He had 26 carries for 88 yards. Because I don't know if you want to get into a shootout with Tennessee. They did last year, but that was kind of the anomaly. And so, the way you kind of slow down Tennessee is you have to get them to the ground when they make that completion. Now they'll try and go over top on you, but Tennessee wants to dink, 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 and then you all come up and then they run that quick place and they get you deep. South Carolina last year obviously still gave up 38 points, but one of the things they did was they kept Tennessee in front of them so that tempo then catches up with you and you make a mistake. And instead of it being 2nd and 4 or 3rd and 3, now you're playing behind the chains. And South Carolina did a fantastic job. They were physical at the point of attack last year, especially with those wide receivers, guys like Jalen Hyatt. And what they were able to do was get them to the ground and not allow the big play. When they allowed the big play, it resulted in points for Tennessee. And again, number 2 is you've got to be able to run the football on Saturday night to help keep your defense off the field. There's going to have to be adjustments when your defense comes off. Your defense coordinator, your secondary coach, your defensive line coach, you got to be able to talk to them for a minute. And if you go 3 and out and you're just spinning your wheels, and Tennessee can get that defense right back on the field before you can maybe make a slight adjustment or see something they're doing, you have no chance. Yeah,
and I like what Dudley just said. No quarterback is at his best when he's running for his life. And,
hold on. I'll push back. I'll push back on that just a tad. And I've had this conversation before. Jake Bentley was legitimately better on the run. And I'll tell you why, because we discussed this ad nauseum on the radio. Mm-hmm. Too mental. He would stand in the pocket, and when you got a clean pocket, you start to overthink yourself and the guy's running across. If you go back and you watch Jake Bentley's highlights, some of his absolute best throws, and it's not like Jake Bentley was Hendon Hooker or any kind of athletic running quarterback, but you play. All of a sudden, your mind is not seeing the guy. You just chunk the football, right? Like it's just your natural motion. It's your natural skill. I'll push. That doesn't mean that you're a great quarterback, mind you. You don't want to be better throwing on the run. That's not what you want. But I will push back on that just a tad because I watched a guy in Jake Bentley who legitimately was better throwing on the run because mentally he wasn't thinking. He was playing the game of football. Totally different.
As Josh Fields was talking about this week, he's thinking too much at the line of scrimmage with everything they've told him, and he's not being able to play freely, which is a big thing for anybody.
Yeah, I mean, people always talk about when guys come out of high school into college, the game, everything is so fast when they first get there versus high school, and then it starts to slow down. That means when you've got your brain scrambled and you're having to think versus react, there's a lot going on. I think this game is going to be really, really a full 60. I think it's going to be one of the best games that you'll see on Saturday. I mean, Tennessee, South Carolina, Shane Beamer, the way they played Georgia, I think they showed a path to victory against Georgia, 4 teams. The second, that first half, 14-3, and then Georgia did what championship programs do. They came out touchdown, but a little more help in the running game. That's what I agree with you. That's what South Carolina needs. Guys, y'all can hang on. Dudley, hopefully Yancy Porter's going to join us from Rebel Yell Hotline. Want to get in. I think it's really cool. This take on South Carolina is, you're not going to get that. Dudley, same thing with you on Arkansas. Both of y'all are very, very objective, but and you tell it like you see it. Man, the SEC this year, I don't know if the league's down, but there are more competitive games that are up for grabs than I've seen in a long, long time. And for TV purposes, that's got to be great. And I mean, Oklahoma looks like they're on the way back. Texas looks good, but don't say it. Don't say it. They're back because they're not. They're not. I mean, they're good, but we'll see. All right, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more. Hour number 2, Wednesdays, Sidelines.
Red River Ford and Toyota, located in Wynne, Arkansas. If you're in the market for a new or used car, truck, or SUV, call, go online, or drop by and see them. Located 45 minutes from Memphis, go off the 4-city exit on I-40 and go north about 15 minutes on Highway 1. Easy to work with and still believe in customer service. If you live out of town, they will deliver your vehicle to you. RedRiverFordToyota.com. Just see what they can do.
Strengthen your seed zone this spring with quality tillage equipment from House Industries. Located in Cherry Valley, Arkansas, House Industries specializes in manufacturing superior equipment that will minimize your downtime and keep you working in the field. To ensure the highest quality control, all design, fabrication, and testing takes place in a 99,000 square foot manufacturing facility located right here in the heart of the Delta. Locate your nearest House equipment dealer online at houseindustriesinc.com.
House Industries, breaking ground.
Sidelines with Rob Browne. Talk sporty to me.
All right, Dudley Dawson had to head back out to, I guess, get to the practice field, do some stories and whatever, but love having him on here. Will, you got a few more minutes. Dudley's going to be on here with us. I just talked to him. He's got a little situation there in traffic, and he will be with us momentarily. So another 5 minutes with you if you can do it. South Carolina football program. I always go back to Steve Spurrier on the documentary about him that Kenny Chesney did. When I got to South Carolina, the first thing I did was say, who is Williams-Brice? Tell me the story there. The donors. You know, he gave a comparison. I don't know if that was accurate or not. So we got one of these big donors. He said Florida and Georgia and Auburn and Alabama and LSU, Tennessee, they got 45, 50, 60 of these people. I don't think South Carolina lacks for money. I think there's a lot of money there. But what's the booster program and the NIL program? How are they doing? What do they call the collective or whatever at South Carolina for NIL?
There's two collectives at this point. There's the Carolina Rise, which has done a lot more. Carolina Rise has done a good bit with football. Both have done a good bit with football, but Carolina Rise tends to do a little bit more, I think, with some of the other sports, baseball, basketball. And then there is one called the Garnet Trust, and that one's probably the bigger of the two and does a little bit more with football. There's also a deal that I still don't fully understand, Park Avenue, which is a company that facilitates NIL deals for players. They're the ones that come up with, the Beats by Dre or anything that's national that they can do. And it's a good probably look at, I'm hesitant in all this NIL stuff. I mean, is there money being passed around? Yes. Is it in some places massively more than other places? Yes. But it's still, I think it's stuff we still don't understand, because I see these players who are getting these NIL deals, and yet I don't ever see a tweet from them or a commercial or anything. I do know, working on the radio station here, I hear certain like the South Carolina punter. His name is Kai Kroger, and he does a Kubota, the tractor spot. So there are ones I hear. But yeah, the NIL is still a wild, wild west of where we are at with college athletics.
Are you comfortable in saying this? Because I do. I think the market correction is coming. I think you're going to see it. We're 2 years, July 1st of 2021 of NIL, a little over 2 years, 26 months, whatever. I think there are a few people that are getting NIL significant money, but every player is not getting some six-figure deal. That's just not happening. I've compared it to the Olympics. A few people from the Olympics will make some money, but most of them are working 2 or 3 jobs wrapped in the American flag just for the privilege to represent their country. And that's what I think is happening in college. The real NIL comes from you grinding it out for 4 or 5 years at said institution, building relationships with fellow students, teachers, alumni, boosters, and getting your degree, and then networking. And, someone knows, hey, Will Gunter was a walk-on. He basically was a blocking dummy with a pulse, but he hung in there and he worked his ass off for 5 years, got his degree in mechanical engineering. My God, Will, when can you start? You need to be helping us build buildings. That's the real NIL, Will. Agree, disagree, or am I nuts? I know that.
Yeah, it's 50. I think the real NIL. Now, there's a problem with the real. What I would say is the real NIL, and what I'll say that is, I think the real NIL is you get the majority of recruits, 70%, 75, I would guess, maybe, that show up and they prove themselves. And again, I'll use South Carolina's punter Kai Kroger, who showed up, and all of a sudden he's a good special teams player, and of course Shane Beamer and the staff, they
Yeah.
utilize special teams, and he gets an NIL deal because he's a good player. He's thrown.
Yeah.
I think he's like thrown 4 touchdowns. He's a punter, and they faked 4 plays, and he's thrown 4 touchdowns. And because of his play on the field, he got an NIL deal. Right? That's the way it should be. You shouldn't get the play. You shouldn't get NIL. I would be a staunch believer. And look, it's like Jurassic Park. Life, whatever that sentence was, they say life finds a way or whatever. Boosters and schools and everybody, coaches, they're going to find a way around it. But I'm a big believer that you should not get NIL money your freshman year. You've done nothing to earn it. That's not the point. That's not the point of NIL. You should have no NIL your freshman year, because what have you technically done to earn it? You've either been recruited to receive it, or you've done something in high school, which again is recruiting to receive it. But after your freshman year, you should be eligible for NIL money, because again, that is the point of the program. With that being said, what you see, and this is the bad side of it, players earn the right for NIL money. They've done what they want. Now they go into the free agency market and go, hey, what can you pay me? What can you pay me? How much are you offering? What are you offering? And then they go back to their school and say, hey, I got these 4 offers out there. What can y'all pay? What can y'all match it? And what can you do? And that's kind of the downside to NIL. I think you're right. You're seeing the top flight recruits, they get this NIL money, and okay, you got the young man, the quarterback from Tennessee, who I think it was $8 million. You had Jaden Rashada at Florida that was 12 million. That's rare. That's not what you're getting. You are getting the kids who show up to school and do what they're supposed to and play well, and then they get the NIL money. They get what they've earned.
Yeah.
That's good. That's the way it should be. The recruits who get it, kind of is what you just said. That's the slim minority. Excuse me, slim minority on that.
Yeah.
But the problem you have is, I talked to an assistant coach about this, and he said, hey, I can recruit this 3-star. I can find a steal out of the state of Tennessee, a guy that Miami, Florida State, and Florida deemed 2 inches too short, 2 steps too slow, and he comes to our school and he blows up, has a great freshman year. And then all of a sudden, Miami, Florida State go, oh, instead of going and recruiting a kid, let's go recruit that kid, offer him more money. And that kid goes, hey, coach, these schools in my home state, close to my family, just offered me this. Can y'all match it? Well, that's not NIL. That's free agency. That's free agency with no contract.
Yeah. Well, the one thing about the music industry in the late 80s, REM got like an $80 million advance for future music that they would write, produce, and record. That was pretty much the end of that band. Now, in the music industry, I know someone in it, and he said, look, we might give you $250,000 or $500,000 in advance, but it keeps you hungry. If somebody's salary is $100,000 a year, you don't pay it to them the first paycheck, $100,000. They got to show up. I would love to read that contract for Lama Leva at Tennessee for $8 million, because people with that kind of money, unless they were born on third base and think they hit a triple, they inherited it, never worked a day in their lives. Those are some boring people to be around, I can assure you. But it's I bet you in the contract, as Shoney says, the big print giveth, the small print taketh away at the bottom of the page. I bet you these contracts are nowhere close to what people think they are for NIL.
What will not be disclosed. Now, I was told, and this is, I don't know if you can ever prove this to be factually correct. I don't know, Freedom of Information Act or whatever, and I don't care to go down that path. There is a certain quarterback in the Big 12 that I believe will be eligible for the draft this year. Otherwise, he'll be playing in the SEC next year, so you can narrow that down, in the state of Texas, who went to a Big 10 school. But his contract stated specifically that by his sophomore year, he had to meet certain requirements, play a certain number of snaps, have a certain completion percentage. I can't remember all of it. I remember talking, there was a recruit in Texas that I talked to, and we talked about this still, and that's how I was acquired this information. But I was told that quarterback had a deal, and that was part of the reason he left that particular Big Ten school to go back to that particular Big 12 school. Again, pretty easy to figure out. But the bottom line is, I wonder if there are incentive-laden deals in these contracts to earn that money. I don't know. These are things we don't know. Freedom of information, I guess, could show a lot of things. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Because I'll go back to it. You've got Amalama Leva at Tennessee is supposedly getting all this money. What is he promoting? I don't look at his Twitter. Thankfully, I try to stay away from 18-year-old Twitter accounts. But what is he? Is he put out tweets for, I don't know, a dog food, a jewelry brand, or like, if you have your own clothing line, you're selling that. That's part of it. That's part of what nobody's paying you for that. You have to sell your merch. That's one thing to put that tweet out. But if you're getting $8 million, are you promoting a boat company, a Mercedes? What are you promoting? And how are you promoting it? Are you on commercials?
Yeah.
If you don't see anybody purchasing something that's not their merchandise, where's that money? What is that money paying for? What are you doing?
Yeah. No, I agree with you totally. I would love to see that contract. And when you talk to people, in my financial advisory practice and have a lot of money, I mean, I'm be straight up with you. Somebody's got $50 million and they get a bill for $75. What is this? Okay. So if people think there's all these people lining up in the dumbass line to just throw money at unproven 17, 18-year-old kids, obviously they don't have kids, because I've got 4 of them, 2 boys, 2 girls. If you give money, I mean, if your kid's constantly asking you for $40, $40, you need to find out how much weed cost. I mean, let's be honest. And I'm telling you, this NIL stuff, it is, when you talk to wealthy people, they think it's stupid. Now, and it's a necessary evil. We got to have it. But the same 25 or 30 people at every school will grow weary of funding this unless you get a mass populist support. Gary Harris, Tuscaloosa, said this. He goes, hell, Alabama, we're being asked to give all this money. He goes, and our fans are saying, we are the pinnacle of college football. We're giving to Tide Pride. We're giving and we're giving and we're giving. We're hemorrhaging money. And now you want us to give NIL. The kids are already getting a God Bless America scholarship.
I mean, there's going to be this. That's college football. I mean, you say that, but Sherwood Blunt. You know who Sherwood Blunt is? I mean, he is. He was the dollar behind SMU, and then he stepped in and basically ran the program. Said, "Screw I don't need an athletic director. I'll run stuff here." It did Alabama, Auburn, Texas, South Carolina. I mean, go across the board. There are donors that want to win. They want to win. They want to go to their corporations. They want to go on their corporate outings. They run and they want to wear their logo, like I'm wearing the Masters right now, and they want to wear their logo and say, "I beat you." And that SMU documentary on 30 for 30, that's an eye-opener, because it wasn't just in the state of Texas. That wasn't exactly Marcus Dupree and the story on him, the 30 for 30. Look, I understand what you're saying. It's 10% of the alumni base. All right. Let's not say it's 90% who's out there. It's 5 or 10%. And if you want to say it's the 1% of the 1%, but as well as I do, there are people who want to show up to a corporate function or be around their buddies at the country club, and they want to say, my school just clocked your school, and I'm going to buy drinks for you, and I'm going to shove it down your throat, and you're going to love every second of it, or else I'm going to follow you to your house and tell you about it. And that's how it works. So there's a market. There is a market for that, and there will continue to be a market for that, because Alabama fans don't want to lose to Auburn. South Carolina does not want to lose to Clemson. Tennessee doesn't want to lose to Georgia. Florida doesn't want to lose to Florida State. Miami wants to. There is always going to be a market where people will pay top dollar to get said recruit. And now that you can kind of do it legally through NIL, it's perfectly fine.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm saying is, I think it's going to work. You got to have it. If it's legal, you better be doing it. And I know a month ago, the figure given for Auburn's NIL was $19 million in cash. I bet that number's gone up a little bit since then. And, but again, generational money and wealth, they don't like to bench press their wallets in public that much. New money, yeah, they will. I mean, but what you got to be careful of, is, at least I know in meetings with people, when they've got 3 or 4 kids and they got a lot of money, they never, we always tell them not to, but I mean, attorneys that I've worked with and CPAs don't give a 19-year-old $10 million.
Rob, everybody's got a vice. Mine is bourbon and boats. Bourbon and boats. I love golf. I'm good at golf. I don't buy golf equipment. I'm still playing with Mizuno clubs and an old TaylorMade driver, and I'm good.
But I bet you're, yeah.
But I don't spend money. But if you want to trot me out a $150 bottle of bourbon, I'm gonna buy 100. I'm now looking at center consoles to go with the other boat I own. So I've got a buddy. I'm actually in a text message conversation as we speak, because we just found another one of our buddies has bought, literally, I kid you not, he's bought 10 cars in 10 months. He's buying a car every month, and he's trading his other ones. Everybody has a vice. In college football, you don't need 20 people who have the vice about. You need 10, and 10 people that are willing to spend $1 million, and those are out there. They're rare, but you have people, and that's what they're going to do. That's their vice. They're going to take their buddies to their suite on Saturdays. They're gonna brag about it. They're gonna have their big tailgates. And you know what else? If you're doing that and you're spending that money, you know what else you're doing? You're having player X come to your tailgate so that you can show off your buddies. Hey, here's my guy. Here's my guy, Spencer Rattler. And then you probably are the same guy who, instead of being smart enough to walk around behind the car and give him $100 handshake, you're probably the guy who does it in front of everybody. So then they think, oh my goodness, look at how much money he's got. He can give it to this guy. Look, man, you need 10 of those guys. You don't need 20. You don't need 50. You need 10 of those guys, and they front your program.
Yeah, no, they can. But I'm getting something here from a friend of mine. Every player at SMU makes $46,000. You know, you've seen that at Miami with the fitness club guy. And Miami's big NIL guy apparently lost a ton of money. I don't know where that's going from. And here's one from Shoney down in Valdosta, Georgia. Florida has a guy named Hugh Hathcock from Valdosta. I don't believe he ever graduated from Florida. That doesn't matter. He loves the Gators. But you know what? Hey, I know it doesn't matter if you graduated from a school or not. If you love that school, you love that school. And I'm not criticizing people, but I'll tell you, working in fundraising, when I do, I've had clients that, you know, that make gifts to different colleges, and they'll do lifetime endowed scholarship professorships. And it's amazing, especially if they have children or they don't have children, how much people love their colleges. And that's why I feel so good about the future of college athletics, because people are always going to love their school. South Carolina, you know, are people, you know, do you think there are going to be 90,000 people going to Jordan-Hare Stadium Saturday, driving, flying from across the country, doing whatever, paying $1,000 a night for hotels and spending food, gas, money? You think they're all going, okay, what's the line on the game? Okay, we're going to lose. I'm going to watch us lose. No, they all think they're going to win. But there's a lot more you go to college for. It's to see your friends. It's to see your fraternity brothers, your sorority sisters, your people you went to college with, professors. Just there's so many things that bring you back to campus, Will. That's what I love about college. And I feel the future is as bright as it's ever been. And I say that because junk in your head, junk out. Positive in, positive out. You are a very positive guy. And I guarantee you could whoop ass on the golf course because you take pride in not having the fanciest equipment, whatever. Believe me, there's a big difference when you buy a road bike, a racing bike, from $500 to $2,000. You'll get some components in the gears and all, but from $2,000 to $10,000 on a bike, it's whose ass is on that seat and how much drive and grit and grind he's got. That's Will Gunter, the game.
Yeah, my days, I'll still play for money, but my days of trying to join the PGA Tour are long gone. I'd rather have a bourbon and cigar and listen to music and shoot an 80 than I would go out and lose and shoot a 71 and lose $500. I'm perfectly good with my 80, 85. I can live with that.
Well, I mean, 80 or 85, look, I don't play golf. I grew up playing tennis. If I played golf, I always say it is so much fun to go play golf, hitting that ball down the fairway. And Shoney sending us a lot of text here from Valdosta was on like the pre-Masters tour, whatever, that young golf tour where all the stud golfers go. Will Johnson, friend of mine, was on the golf team at Auburn. He always says, Browne, keep your head down, your knees bent, and follow through. Simple advice.
You know what?
Easy to follow.
It wasn't said to me when I was 14 and I was learning to play, but my uncle who owned golf courses in Myrtle Beach told me, he said when I turned 20, he waited till I was 21, which was nice enough. But he said your biggest problem in golf is after you take a swing, you don't take a drink. If you don't walk over and take a sip of your, in my case, bourbon, you're not playing correctly. He said, whatever, it doesn't matter. It doesn't. The only person you can be mad at is yourself in golf. And if you get mad at yourself playing with your 3 buddies on a beautiful day, that's your fault. That's nobody else's fault. Walk over and have a drink. Doesn't matter where the ball goes. You can always get another one and drop it and keep playing.
Yeah. Look, Yancy Porter had an emergency situation with his dog, and I love dogs, and hopefully everything's going to be okay. Hopefully he gets the dog to the vet. Everything will be okay. But Yancy was going to be on with us. We'll try to get him on later this week. Will, I really appreciate you staying on with us a little bit longer. Love doing it with you. Like I say, met you up there at Media Days. Back in the spring, you started joining us. I'll come on your show anytime if you need somebody. If you need Uncle Albert from the basement to come up, when he's not on his meds. No, we'll have a lot of fun. But what I love about you is you've got a lot of experience doing a lot of things. Tell people how they can follow you, keep up with you, and I hope and pray that your show is going statewide in the Palmetto State, and somebody in Charlotte will pick it up. But I love your wit and wisdom every morning early. You are a future duck hunter. You just don't know it because you love getting up at 4:00.
I know. I don't love it. That's not true. And I've been asked to go out to Arkansas, wherever, for the dove fields. That's not my thing. But yeah, we're 107.5 the game in Columbia, 100.5 the game in Florence, 100.3 the game in Myrtle Beach. And yeah, we're hoping to continue to move around the state. And you can always follow me on Twitter at Will with 1L, WIL, Gunter, GUNTER. And yeah, like last night, went to turn on the Braves, went to watch a little baseball because there was no football last night. And of course, in our area, it was blacked out. So I tweeted about watching Everybody Loves Raymond. So I try to keep it light, man. Sports is fun. It's not meant to be serious.
Yeah, Raymond needs to learn to stand up to his mother. I'll just leave it at that. She's a little domineering.
Tough story last night.
Yeah, it was. Hey, Will, thanks so much. Let's do it again next week. Good luck Saturday.
Won't be Monday. I'm in a golf tournament. I'm in a golf tournament on Monday, but Tuesday, Wednesday, we'll figure it out.
All right, love it, man. Take care. We'll take a quick break. Be right back with Johnny Ballpark Franks up in Nashville. The big picture. Chief Osceola will be right back.
Unbelievably, every 2 minutes in our communities, a child is either bought or sold for sex. I am R.A. Dickey, board member for the Nashville Anti-Human Trafficking Coalition. Join me and millions of others in our fight against human trafficking and for its victims by helping to educate the most vulnerable among us, our middle and high school students. Go to nhtcoalition.org, become a partner, and help keep our families safe, because none of God's children are for sale.
All right, Johnny Ballpark Franks back here. Who is the world's most beloved pianist? Richard Clayderman? No, it is Johnny Ballpark Franks. As you can see, the Steinway in the background there, playing a little bit of Beethoven and Mozart in C minor. Audrey on the snare drums. But Johnny, the big picture of college football, man. Love having you on. You always bring it. You've got the big picture. Florida State Seminoles, Gene Deckerhoff here, Chief Osceola coming out on Renegade. The Seminoles at 4-0. Now, how many games has Florida State have they lost in the past? Wide right, wide left. Was that not just karma coming back in favor of the Seminoles? 28 seconds left. Clemson has a field goal to win it in regulation. That line all last week had me worried, had me staying up at night. Shout out to Bob Rosen. But Seminoles are 4-0. That's all that matters. What a win Saturday up at the other Death Valley.
It's interesting. I had Tommy Bowden on my show on Monday, and we were talking about, just these single games, how it could change the complete complexity of college football history. We've talked about the Pat Dye era of Auburn. If Auburn could have found a way to beat Florida State in the late 80s, we would be looking at a different Auburn program going into the 90s and beyond. The Auburn Tigers could have been the Florida State of the 14 straight years of top 5 finishes. But for whatever reason, Florida State and Bobby Bowden had Auburn's number in the late 80s. And that's why Auburn had top 25 teams, but not those consistent top 5 teams. And the same thing with Florida State. They found ways to get by Florida in the 90s, but early on in the 90s, it was the struggles against Miami, missing those, as you pointed out, wide right 1, 2, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And look, football is a crazy game, and you just want to put yourself in a position for these opportunities, these close finishes to go your way. And that's exactly what Florida State was able to do against Clemson on Saturday.
Well, you sit there and you look at what happened Saturday in Clemson. Mike Norvell, I think he's just a hell of a coach. I watched him again at Memphis those 4 years. He's got so many fans. Like Cheryl Chambers talking to last night. This lady has a lot, kids, grandkids. She's got so many flags in her yard. She's a big Florida State fan in Memphis just because of what he did at Memphis. And I think a lot of people in Memphis are. When he got there, Johnny, he didn't get the job because everything was going so well at Florida State. But he's a great play caller, and he makes everybody on that team want to get better. That's a gift, isn't it?
Well, and I think it goes even further than that. He has individuals on this team. He has made the most of recruiting naturally out of the high school ranks, being able to keep the players happy on campus, and at the same time being able to do a great job of recruiting as far as the transfer portal is concerned. And moving forward, if you're not doing all of those things, you're not going to be a successful coach with regards to winning conference titles and also winning national championships. And Mike Norvell has that buy-in. Everybody was already quick. I'm still trying to dissect Ryan Clark and the comments he made, ready to give Deion Sanders a Hall of Fame coaching career after 2 weeks, right? Yeah. Look, the reality set in last week in that game against Oregon. I think that continues this week when they get beat down by USC. And so the question is this: the players that Deion Sanders has, for example, at Colorado, where's your loyalty? Is your loyalty for the university, or is your loyalty there with Deion Sanders? Because if things start getting shaky, how close is that bond that everybody's wanting to brag about there in Boulder? I'll take that and then throw you a Hugh Freeze with Auburn. Yes, this is going to be some growing pains this year for the Auburn Tigers. However, I do believe in the buy-in there. And if you want to develop a culture, if you want to be able to build and get beyond and start winning championships, you have to build a strong foundation. Given the examples of first-year head coach Hugh Freeze at Auburn, first-year head coach Deion Sanders at Colorado, I will take what Hugh Freeze is doing with Auburn any day of the week for long-term success.
Yeah, and wow, the offense is really, really bad at Auburn. I mean, it is 5 straight games not being able to pass for more than 100 yards against a Power 5 opponent. It's like you have to work at that, It's like screwing up a 2-car funeral. I mean, because 52 yards is one pass. Then you look at – but I do agree this. Hugh Freeze checks all those boxes. Engagement with the fans. Loves being there. Wants to be there. Sings the fight song. Rolls Toomer's corner. He genuinely is like that from everybody I know that knows him. Yeah, he's made some mistakes in his life. Hell, who hadn't? And we're all like Philip Marshall talked about recently on the show. Who hadn't gotten second chances? I've gotten plenty myself. We all have. But I want to tell you something. Look at what's going on with Mike Norvell. This is year 4. Last year they went 10-3. The recruiting, all that stuff starting to happen. From Renegade in Pensacola, Florida, FSU will be 12-0. They should be, but they still.
I agree. In fact, that's what I have Florida State going 12-0 in the regular season. So I totally agree with what Renegade just posted.
Well, you know, and out of respect to Renegade, we got to play it. I love it. I love it. Woo! I'm gonna tell you what, that is about the coolest. I mean, that
I'm gonna tell you the truth. We brought this up. We brought this up, and I was sharing this with my fraternity brothers recently. You know, I grew up in the atmosphere of Alabama fans. You know, when you would go to an Alabama game, you got used to the Roll Tide roll on kickoffs, and so I go to Florida State as a student, and it just seemed like yeah, but there was nothing. There was nothing going on. And then I got word that the band, the Marching Chiefs, were going to be doing something with their hands in the motion and this chant. And so my fraternity just happens, you know, every week for home games, when you'd have a home game, you'd have a lottery. And so you'd put all your tickets together, so 50 to 100, whatever it is, and then they would draw for the best seats for the student section. So fraternity, sorority. So if you wanted to go sit, that's why if you wonder why a group of students are able to sit together, you put them together, the ticket office puts you, and you win a lottery. Well, we just so happened to be right in front of the band, and the band started doing that. Our fraternity group started doing that, and the rest is history. So now millions upon millions upon millions of fans are doing it. As a student, I was one of the first student groups, the first 50 folks to ever do the chop. So very proud of that.
Well, and I'm just sitting there looking at that Florida State brand. Again, you go back, the power to be able to say from 1987 to 2000, 14 consecutive years of not being outside of the top four. Couple of national championships. You played for the national championship.
It is top 5 because you can't share. So I'm going to say it is officially top 5, not top 4. Although some of the coaches want to kind of go down that path, and that's why people make that mistake. It was top 5 finishes, not top 4.
All right. Okay. Well, from David Bowie in Dothan, Alabama, Major Tom says the ground controlled says the view from above is all Seminoles with Gene Deckerhoff. I mean, it's a powerful brand, Johnny. I always tell you the big picture of college football. You've interviewed more Heisman Trophy winners than anybody. And that is a big damn deal. You've also done over 14,000 interviews, but I'm myopically focused on the Florida State Seminoles. I just, that's a powerful brand. They're rolling again. Jimbo's gone. And all the things that made
him. Thank goodness, by the way. Thank goodness. I've always had personal, wonderful personal relationships as far as with Jimbo, as far as interactions. But thank goodness he is no longer the coach for the Florida State Seminoles.
Yeah. And this narrative that's pushed out there that Florida State doesn't have money and all. I mean, that's just BS. I mean, look, they started playing football, I think, in 1948. So it was a women's college. We know all that stuff. But when footnote to history, you and I can both name him because we're both savants, but name the football coach who proceeded, without Googling it, Bobby Bowden, who was hung in effigy in 1975 in Morgantown, West Virginia. But name Daryl Mudra. That's who it was.
A coach that almost beat an Alabama team in Tuscaloosa. Florida State, a terrible team in that area you're talking about, up 7-0 on a national championship contending Alabama squad. Alabama had to get a safety and 2 field goals by my friend Bucky Berry to beat Florida State 8-7. So I'm certainly, and that was probably my first thoughts about Florida State. And it just goes to show you in a situation like that, you could go 0-11, but you can still flirt with success against the best teams in the country.
Yeah, and when they brought Bobby Bowden in there, that great speech, we'll play anybody, anywhere, anytime.
And he did. He took their money and still beat them on the road.
And brought back those chunks of turf and planted them in the graveyard right outside of Doak S. Campbell Stadium. Johnny, I got to ask you this because I'm an idiot savant, but who was Doak S. Campbell?
Oh, he was the original. He was a president of Florida State, and I still think it just like at Auburn where you have Jordan Hare. I really wish. I understand they've named the field after Bobby Bowden, and that's all fine
Yeah.
and dandy. I will always say that they should be Bowden somewhere in the name of that stadium as well.
Yeah. Well, in 1973, then Governor George Wallace at the Auburn-Ole Miss game, which Auburn won 14-7, a great couple of catches by Chris Vaccarella and Jeff Gilligan. I remember that. Phil Gargis was the quarterback. Governor George Wallace, in that great Southern accent, he get out there and he says, and the stadium was named Cliff Harris Stadium at the time, and he said, "From henceforth and forever, the stadium will be the Jordan Hare Stadium." And Shug Jordan was the first and only coach to ever have a stadium named after him while he was still alive and still coaching. And Shug, for the dedication, wore a white tux, just first class. What do you expect from a great Irish Catholic? But anyway.
And by the way, I spoke to Bobby Bowden about the whole thing about the stadium, and before his final breath, he privately, he told me he wanted that honor. He wanted his name to be associated with that stadium, and that's really sad that it never happened when he was alive.
It is, and Miss Ann is still alive.
Yes, she is. Just celebrated her 91st birthday.
God almighty. And when Bobby Bowden died, I think it was August 25th of 2021, I was coming back from the Spring River in Hardy, Arkansas, and we had Tony Barnhart on. He's on with us a lot. And he told a story about Bobby Bowden had, I believe he had lost a grandson, died. And there was a game that week. And he said after the game, Tony Barnhart said he was in the locker room, he and several other reporters. And, Bobby Bowden got through at the press conference, and he turned around, and after all he'd been through that week, and he autographed a hat and threw it to one of the guys, a young writer from Tampa, I think, who had younger children, and just, walked. That was tough. And look, you can criticize anybody, but Bobby Bowden, what he did for Florida State football, and too many people that I know and respect really thought the world of him. You being one of those, okay? And I believe you would say it if it weren't true.
I lost my father when I was 13, and I just so happened my first run-ins with Bobby Bowden, I was in radio as far as working at a top 40 radio station in Tallahassee while I was going to school. I was not in sports at that time. And, so I worked in sports as a teenager, got out of it, just was a normal radio music DJ. And I hosted a pep rally before one of the games. And I had introduced Coach Bowden on a Friday night before one of the home games. And fast forward, he and I become really good friends over the last 10 plus years. And he really was a father figure to me in so many ways, but I wasn't the only one. And Tommy Bowden and myself, we were talking about this Monday night on the air. He literally understood that role of being a father figure, a grandfather figure, and he embraced it. It wasn't an act. You could pick up the phone and called him anytime. For the longest period, remember the phone books? He was always in the phone book. You could find his number. Anybody, any random person from the West Coast to the East Coast could have picked up the phone and got in touch with Coach Bowden.
Well, and that's, boy, isn't that refreshing? You just don't see that much anymore. Well, you don't see that. You don't see that at all.
I don't think Nick Saban's number is going to be, after his final days are over as head coach of Alabama, I don't think he's going to be easily found anywhere.
Yeah, and I'm getting a lot of comments coming in here. Hey, text them, send in your questions and comments. They also come in via text. But
hey, can I throw some love to Dothan? I spent so much time in Dothan, going from Huntsville to Florida State, driving back and forth to the campus. I felt like in so many ways I'm an unofficial citizen of Dothan. So big shout out to all of your listeners in Dothan as well.
Yeah, it's one of those hub cities down there. Southeast Medical, Flowers Medical, about 100,000 people.
Home of Stedman Shealy, by the way, former Alabama great quarterback.
As Dave Tompkins always says, John Forney will go, there goes Stedman Shealy. This Bromberg's Alabama touchdown brought to you by Bromberg's Jewelers in Mountain Brook and throughout the great state of Alabama.
You remember Charlie Ward as a
Yes.
player, and and I had him on my show Monday too because it's the 30th anniversary of Charlie Ward winning the Heisman Trophy at Florida State, and so many trivia questions involving Charlie Ward. I mean, here's a guy; he's one of only 3 Heisman winners to play professionally in a sport other than football. One of them includes Bo Jackson from Auburn, who played in the major leagues. But Charlie Ward, a first-round draft pick in the NBA. I told him something he was unaware of because, first of all, greatness. He led Florida State in a 12-month period of time. We're talking about a national championship in football, a Heisman Trophy, and he led the Florida State Seminoles to an Elite 8 appearance, right, before losing to Kentucky. He was unaware that the 62 winner, Terry Baker, not only winning the Heisman Trophy for Oregon State, he was a part of a Final Four basketball team. So I'm going to hook those two together because they've never had a chance to talk to each other.
Yeah. Well, here it is. I like this from Shep Proudfoot in Fort Walton Beach. I'll vouch for renaming Doak S. Campbell Bowden Stadium.
I will halfway agree with Shep right there. What is Bryant Denny Stadium? It was Denny Stadium before Bryant, right? So, now last time I checked, B comes before C, so I'm going to go Bowden Campbell Stadium. How about that?
Okay, I agree because what they did, Clifford Leroy Hare at Auburn. If you go to St. Michael's Catholic Church, a little bit of interesting trivia. There's a whole row, a pew there in the church named after Clifford Leroy Hare, their family, the Jordans, of course, and also a regular parishioner, almost, I believe, a daily celebrant at Mass at St. Michael's Catholic Church in Auburn, up till the days before he died, was Colonel Hal Moore of the movie We Were Soldiers Once and Young. And General Moore died February 10th, I believe, of 2017. I was in Auburn for that funeral, and they had the funeral there. Monsignor Skonecki, my pledge brother's older brother, was the priest. And then they had a 35-mile motorcade all the way over to Fort Benning where he was buried. But, I think about, Jordan Hare Stadium. Bowden Campbell. Shep, I like your recommendation. I like the fact that you'll vouch for renaming the stadium. But it's right. Bowden Campbell Stadium. Jordan Hare. And by the way, Johnny, you're sort of an etymologist. That is the entomology is the study of words. Why is it that in central Alabama, from Selma all the way across the state over into Georgia, because I had a fraternity brother from Monticello, Georgia, Robert O. Jordan. Everybody pronounces it Jordan in that area. And I've talked to Suge's son, Ralph Jr., about it, and they were actually Welsh, and I think there's Irish and Welsh in there, in West Virginia, and made it to Selma, but pronouncing it Jordan. You don't see that anywhere else. Have you ever noticed how just in that band across central Alabama and central Georgia and nowhere else is it pronounced Jordan?
He is the only individual with that spelling that I've ever heard that name's pronounced Jordan. And that's why so many people mess it up. I think once, in my whole history of doing broadcasting, it just slipped out and I said Jordan, but I corrected myself. But it's so quick to, just because of the spelling, to think it's Jordan. If you have no idea or no, any kind of idea about the history of Auburn football, you would have no idea that it's pronounced Jordan.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you see like the Bowden family, Bowden. Sometimes you'll see that pronounced Bowden.
Yeah.
And so I'm always double checking because just when you think you have it figured out, you'll make a mistake.
Yeah. Interesting Heisman trivia here. Again, it's Savant Wednesday with Rob and Johnny, but that's what Dave Tompkins is. We're all the same age. Dave Tompkins over in Bluffton, South Carolina, in the Low Country, from Mountain Brook, lifelong Alabama fan, West Point graduate. Shout out to the Black Knights of the Hudson. He was on with us Saturday. But you think about this. I remember Buddy Davidson, former sports information director at Auburn with David Housel, told me this one time about the Heisman campaign for Pat Sullivan. He said, back then you would go to New York, and like Mr. Haney, you'd pull up with your truck. Mr. Douglas, this here rifle's only been dropped twice. I'll sell it to you for 75% off. Mr. Haney, get out of here. But anyway, go to New York and you would talk about it. So Pat Sullivan, Howard Cosell, here he is with his comb over, head rug, whatever that thing was. It was alive. And he's going, he's talking about Pat Sullivan to Howard, and they're having a little bit of dialogue. And Buddy Davidson said, Howard goes, Buddy, Pat's one hell of a player. But how is a guy from Auburn, a private school in Georgia, going to win the Heisman Trophy against Ed Marinaro from Cornell and the Big East, media machine? He said, Howard, Auburn's a state university located in Alabama, and he's the best player in America, hands down. So, yeah, you're right. Maybe if they would have waited till after the Alabama game, but then again, maybe if they hadn't given him the Heisman, Pat Sullivan would have approached that game and said, I got to win this one like I did the Georgia game earlier. But you got a chance to interview Pat Sullivan many times, I bet. He gave me the coolest bit of advice about playing quarterbacks when they're freshmen. He said, fortunately, when I was a freshman at Auburn, we couldn't play, but our freshman team beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa. You don't ever know what happens to a guy if you bring him out too young. He may be, destroyed and never recover from it. But the Heisman campaigns, when did the Heisman change, Johnny, from being the best person, the best player, all the great things you look for in the All-American guy, to the best player with the best stats on the highest ranked team? It's different now.
Well, you think about, here we are getting ready to approach 90 winners, right? And, the first award went out in 35. I asked you the quick trivia question, who's the first Heisman winner from Alabama? Everybody knows it's Mark Ingram.
Yeah.
Why did Mark Ingram win more than anything else, better than any kind of campaign that you could have for Mark Ingram? The fact that Alabama, with all those national titles, had never produced a Heisman winner. The other part of that is because I think Nebraska made a huge mistake because they didn't send out a simple little postcard to all the voters and to radio announcers, to TV personnel, how to pronounce Ndamukong Suh. If they had just done a simple thing like that, forget about how many sacks or quarterback pressures or whatever, just a simple thing on how to pronounce Ndamukong Suh, Suh might have won the Heisman in 2009. The other thing about Heisman winners, if the Heisman Trophy had been given out in 34 instead of 1935, which was Chicago's Jay Berwanger.
Yeah.
Chicago, by the way, used to be a member of the Big Ten. If they had given out in 34, Alabama would have had the first Heisman winner, and that was Dixie Howe. So, but as far as where we stand today with all of the look, before it used to be a career award, and that's why Paul Hornung won it when he won it, because Notre Dame was 2 wins, 8 losses, and Paul Hornung still won. But it used to be a career thing where, you had the buildup. And even with Herschel Walker won, remember, he finished 3rd his freshman year, 2nd his sophomore year, and then finally winning it his junior year. This has happened over the last 20 years, honestly. I mean, you've had campaigns. I mean, the original one that I thought of was Notre Dame and Joe Theismann. That's right. It was Joe Theismann. They changed the pronunciation of his last name to Joe Theismann. That was from the sports information department at Notre Dame. And what did that do for him? He finished runner-up to Jim Plunkett from Stanford in 1970.
Wow. Who was the famous, he just died a couple of years ago, sports information director at Notre Dame? Roger Vaccarella?
Something along those lines. I know that's who, and I've had a chance, Valdesari.
Roger Valdesari, yeah.
And I had a chance to spend some time around him back when I first was in sports information in the 80s. And so I actually talked to him about that. And to me, that's a great one, especially if it works.
Because
remember back then, other than bowl games, and there weren't that many bowl games back then. You could have a 10-1 team and not make a bowl game. And so what happened was back then, because of the way the TV rights worked, you could only be on television 5 times in a 2-year period of time. Let that sink in.
Would
only
that count the bowl game?
5 times in not counting bowl games.
Okay.
So only 5 regular season games in a 2-year period of time. That's why everybody remember the Bama punt game of 1972. That
Yes.
game was not on television.
Yep.
You know, the famous USC-Alabama game on the Friday night when Alabama launched the Wishbone. That game was not on television. I mean, so many great games that you had to watch on radio with your favorite local radio announcer.
You know what's funny is I've been saying I want to have a couple of things. Forensic officiating, where we go back in time with the reviews and see how many games in history the outcome would have been different with reviews. That's
absolutely.
That's one series I want to start. And the second one is what you just said about all of the
look at Alabama, Texas. You know, they played a regular season game a couple of weeks back. Joe Namath in the Orange Bowl. Alabama already a national chance because back then you award national titles before bowl games. Joe Namath comes in, relieves Steve Sloan. They both were injured, but Namath comes in, leads Alabama back, and at the goal line, Joe Namath scores. And yet the official says, no, you're short. And so on the field, Texas wins the game 21-17.
Correct.
But Namath scored on that play.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Keith Donovan, who's now the ESPN college football historian, wrote a book, The Missing Ring, about Alabama in 66. Right. He's a brilliant mind. And he talks about in the 70s, the 150th anniversary of college football in 2019, the television aristocracy that we grew up with, the certain teams that were on all the time. But you think about all the great games that were not televised. And you know there's film, not tape, but film of those games. I think some smart TV network could really get a lot of viewers by finding that film and, digitally remastering it or whatever, and broadcasting those games, the games that were never on TV that are now there. Again, it's like the new photos of Marilyn Monroe, James Dean, or Elvis Presley that you've never seen, or unreleased music or whatever. But Johnny,
well, I'll give you another one. You go back to the 70s. Integration happened as far as in college football, especially in the South. And that's why you hear individuals will say, well, that's why the HBCUs, the Gramblings, the Tennessee States, the Jackson States all went downhill as far as talent compared to the Alabamas of the world. Yeah. See, that's not true. It didn't happen. If you go back and look at the drafts of the 70s after integration, guess what happened? These schools were still out drafting players from the NFL more so than Alabama. With the tops of the tops in the country. To me, the biggest thing was the fact that these programs, the Alabamas, USCs with their brands, because of television, is why we started seeing the gap between what didn't used to be as far as talent-wise, which now is the difference in talent between these top blue bloods in the country compared to the HBCUs. I go back, if somehow these universities has got together back in the 70s, Tennessee State, Florida A&M, Grambling, etc., worked together to find their own TV package, we could have had a different situation as far as with the talent then and comparing it to now, because I don't think you would have had a drop-off, mainly because of the fact that they wanted to be on television.
Yeah. And look, we've run out of time. I hate this, but most often we see the face of Christ in the least among us. Folks, go out and do kind things for people. Kind words, kind deeds can go a million miles. You put junk in your head, junk out. Positive in, positive out. As Gandhi said it best, Johnny, I love this quote. I will not allow other people to walk through my mind with their dirty feet. But what I will do before we say goodbye is do this one more time. Man, I'm going to tell you what, that is college football at its best. Johnny, how can people keep up with you and follow you? Folks, we'll be back tomorrow, but Johnny, tag out with your great information.
Just follow me on Twitter at BP Frank Show. That's where I publicize everything else.
Johnny, look, man, the ump in Huntsville, the smartest city in the state. See you tomorrow. Thanks, Johnny. We'll see you next week.
Take care.